Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Now in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Microsoft PowerToys for Windows 10. Now we've taken a look at the previous two versions of PowerToys for Windows 95 and Windows XP on this channel. If you want to go ahead and check those out, I will have a link up in the cards to a playlist containing those videos. But yes, PowerToys actually got its start back in the era of Windows 95 in the 90s. And so that's when the very first version of this set of software came out. Microsoft followed that up a few years later with the release of PowerToys for XP. And basically what these are a set of enhancements to the Windows operating system that is really intended for power users, as you can probably tell by the name. So this version for Windows 10, Microsoft brought it back after many years, because they haven't released a version since Windows XP. So they've brought it back after many years of not doing anything with this line of software. Now the great thing about this is not only are these completely free programs that you can download, but this specific version for Windows 10 is actually open source, as you can tell because it's on GitHub, and you can go here and view the source code, and you can actually contribute to this. Microsoft does encourage, if we scroll down here to the very bottom of the page, they do encourage contributions. They do ask you to read this contributor's guide right here. So if you're interested in contributing to PowerToys, well, Microsoft has the tools available for you to do that. So this specific version right here is only currently available for 64-bit processors. That's currently the only way that you can get this, is if you have a 64-bit copy of Windows 10, which chances are if you're running Windows 10 on a newer computer, it's going to be 64-bit, unless it's like an ARM device or something like that, which obviously that wouldn't work on this anyways. You also need to have .NET Framework, or the .NET Core runtime, which is available on this page. If you scroll down here under the requirements, you need to have .NET Core 3.1 desktop runtime, and they do have a direct link to this right here. So if you click on this, it will take you to the download page, and you have to obviously run this and install it before installing Microsoft PowerToys for Windows 10. Now to download PowerToys for Windows 10, all you have to do is scroll down here and click on the downloading and release notes link right here, and this gets you to the multiple different releases of this software that they have. So the latest release as of this video was 3 days ago, and this is a preview release. As you can probably tell by the version, it's 0.18.1. So this is not a final piece of software that they're going to publish in the Windows Store or something like that. That could definitely happen at some point in the future, but as of right now, this is a preview program, and again, it's only really intended for those people who know what they're doing and are really power users who kind of want to tweak the inner workings of the operating system and kind of add some more features. That's essentially what this allows you to do. So like in all change logs, you have a list of all of the changes that were made, and you can get more information about that by viewing the release notes. And you've got 3 assets down here. Obviously the MSI file is what you need to actually install it, but you can also download the source code in 2 different formats. So this is what the installation wizard looks like right here. It's pretty basic. We're just going to click on next. This is licensed under the MIT license, so if you want to read that, there it is. And a huge disclaimer right here, this is provided as is. That this software is not officially supported by Microsoft, which is the case for all of the PowerToys releases, and that's why they were offered for free. So Microsoft basically gave these out to people. For the older versions, for Windows 95 and Windows XP, they made these programs available for download, but did not provide any official support for them, so you could not call up Microsoft to get support. So these were only really intended, as the name suggests, for power users, and that's definitely the case here because this is, again, as is software. So we're going to click on next, and we obviously get these same options to choose the directory where you want to install it to, if you want to create a shortcut on the desktop, and if you want to start the PowerToys at logon. Now, unlike the versions we saw in 95 and XP, PowerToys for Windows 10, all of the settings and everything for it are contained in a single application that you can open up, and it has to be running in the background for some of these PowerToys to actually work properly. And we're going to kind of get into that because I'm going to be taking you through every single one of these. So this is what the icon looks like right here. It's a PowerToys preview. We'll just open it up, and it doesn't come up with the window right away. It's actually running in the background, as you can see by the icon in the system tray. And if we click on this, then it will open up the PowerToys settings. So there are 7 PowerToys PowerToys, and we can modify settings for all of them in the sidebar here, but we're going to take a look at the General tab first. So by clicking this button right here, you can run PowerToys as an administrator, and this is recommended if you're going to be running other programs on your system as an administrator, as you would typically do in some cases. So for example, if you were opening up an elevated command prompt, if you have it running as an administrator and PowerToys is not, the command prompt window is not going to be able to interact with some of the PowerToys interfaces, for example, fancy zones, which we'll get into momentarily here. So if you want to use elevated applications running as an administrator with the PowerToys, you have to be running PowerToys as an administrator as well. So, and you can read more about that by clicking on this link right here. And you've got some appearance options down here. You can choose if you want the settings window to be running with the light or the dark theme. By default, it's set to system default. You can also choose to run this at startup, which if you use these tools, obviously you're going to want to run it at startup. You can check for updates right here, and you can enable automatic updates except on meter connections, as it says right there. And there are some links down here to the GitHub repository, report a bug, which opens up the GitHub issues page. You can request a feature, view the privacy statement, and view the open source notice. So that's all there is in the General tab. Let's go ahead and actually start taking a look at the PowerToys. So the first one here is called Fancy Zones. Now, Fancy Zones is a window manager, and it's also somewhat of an alternative to the Windows Snap interface that you have in Windows, where you can snap windows to the corners of the desktop or on each side. But it doesn't provide all of the same features as you're going to see. So the best way for me just to explain this to you is to show it to you. So let's click on Launch Zones Editor. So this is the Zones Editor right here. And you've got a couple of different presets in here. You've got focus, columns, rows, grid, and priority grid. And all of these are essentially different interfaces for you to snap windows into. So you've got, all these presets here. You can also change how many windows that you want to be able to fit in these presets. So if you want maybe 6 windows, well, the presets will change accordingly. So now we've got 6 rows, 6 columns, and you can see we can increase this all the way up to 40 windows. So you can got 40 windows right here. This probably wouldn't be the most effective way of using 40 windows. You've got a grid of all 40 windows. Now, what you can also do is create your own custom layout. So if you want to do that, you just click on this Create New Custom and you hit Edit Selected Layout. And then it brings up this interface right here. And you can give it a name, so we'll just call it My Layout. And you can add a new zone. So you click on Add a New Zone, and this is the zone right here. So maybe you would like to have a window snapped right in the center of your screen, kind of like a much larger window, and then also have some other windows running on the sides here, maybe a little bit smaller. This is fully customizable. I mean, you've got you can rearrange these however you want. So I'm just going to add 5 zones up here that I can then use to snap windows into. So there we go. So I just click on Save and Apply. So now it's applied my zone. So what you can do is there's this hotkey shortcut right here, and by default it's the Windows key plus the tilde key. So if you press a Windows key tilde, it will open up the zones layout. So this is how you can customize it. But if you want to actually drag a window into it, that's where these options down here come into play. So you've got this option right here for holding the Shift key to activate zones while dragging. So this is checked by default. So I have this window right here. I can drag it around, and if I'm dragging it and I press and hold the Shift key, it opens up my Fancy Zones layout. So if I want the PowerToy settings to be in zone 1 here, I just let go of my mouse, and there you go. Now PowerToy settings is snapped in zone 1. I can do the same thing with Firefox. I've got it selected here and I'm dragging the window around. I can hold down the Shift key, and let's say I want to drag this in zone 4, so I can do that. Let's say I want to open up the recycle bin, and I can drag this into zone 2. So you kind of see how this works. Now, this is one of the things that sets Fancy Zones apart from the regular Windows Snap interface. When you remove a window from one of these zones, the window does not resize. It stays in its same size that it was in the zone. Now, this is in contrast to the regular Windows Snap interface, where if I were to take this recycle bin window and snap it to the left side and then remove it from the left side, it will resize to the size that it was originally. So that is how the Fancy Zones differs. The other way that it differs is, you probably just saw with this kind of quick picker interface right here, where when you snap a window, you get this interface where you can select another window to snap to the other side. You don't have that in fancy zones. So if I were to snap PowerToys settings to zone 2 here, it's not going to come up with like an interface for me to pick another one of these windows to snap into one of the other zones. So those are some of the differences, but it's a really useful tool for you to customize these zones and just essentially snapping windows on your system. But you can obviously use both at the same time. You can still use the regular Windows Snap interface. Using fancy zones does not disable it. You can also have this option enabled right here, which is also enabled by default, and that is holding a non-primary mouse button to activate the zones. So I'm pressing my left mouse button to drag this window around. Now if I press and hold the right mouse button, the fancy zones will come up, and I can let go of it and the zones will disappear. You can also disable both of these, and then when you just drag a window around, the fancy zones will automatically come up in the background. What you can also do is, if you don't really use the Windows Snap interface and you prefer fancy zones over that, you can have fancy zones override the Windows Snap hotkey. So normally when you press a Windows key and like the left arrow, for example, it will snap to the left side. So if I didn't want that to happen, I could check this, and now when I press a Windows key left, it will snap it to zone 5, and I can kind of just snap these around however I want. If you have multiple monitors on your system, this option would be useful because it allows you to move the windows between the fancy zones across all of your different monitors. This option is pretty self-explanatory. It will keep windows in their zones even if the screen resolution changes. This one right here allows you to, if you have a window set in a certain zone, let me just enable it to show you here. If I have this one, for example, in zone 2, and then I open up the fancy zones interface and I say change this to this view right here and click apply, the PowerToys and all the windows in the fancy zones will auto resize to the new zone. So this was in zone 2, now it's in the new zone 2. So that's essentially how that works. Another useful one is making the dragged window transparent, and this actually does not apply to the PowerToys settings menu, but it will apply to all other windows from what I can tell. And so this is when, like, let me just resize this so I can grab it up here. When I'm dragging this Firefox window around, for example, and I press one of the hotkeys to open up fancy zones, you'll see that the window will actually become transparent, so I can see the zones behind it much easier. You can also change the appearance, so you can change the zone highlight opacity. So if I want this to be 25, for example, you can change the highlight color. So right now it's this default bluish color. I can change it to maybe a red color. You can change the inactive zone color. Maybe I want that to be green. And you can change the border color, say I want that to be black. So now it's going to look totally different when I open up the fancy zones menu. So yeah, there are a lot of customization options in here, which is very, very useful. And you also can exclude applications. So if you don't want a certain application to trigger fancy zones when you're dragging the window around, you can specify that here. Next up is File Explorer Preview, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. What it does is it expands the file types that are able to be previewed in Windows Explorer's or File Explorer's preview pane. Now, the File Explorer preview pane is nothing new. You can enable this. This is a standard feature within Windows 10. You can do this by clicking on the View tab and clicking on Preview pane. Now, normally you cannot preview .md and .svg files, but when you have this enabled, you can. So if I go to Downloads here, I've got a readme.md file. I can click on this, and it will preview in the preview pane right here. So this is the readme.md file for fancy zones. So you can see I can view the entire document right here without having to open this up in a text editor, for example. So very, very useful, and again, you can also do this with SVG files. Next up is Image Resizer. Now, we saw a tool just like this in the Windows XP version of PowerToys, where it allowed you to resize images just by right-clicking on them. But in this iteration here in Windows 10, we have some more customization options, because you can actually change what image sizes will show up when you actually go to resize the image. So these are the default options right here. You can add a new size if you want to. You can also change the encoding settings down here, and you can use these parameters here to specify what the file name will be by default. So the default option is %1, which is the original file name, and then the size name in parentheses. So you can change this. Say I want to add the selected width, for example, so I can add %3 to the end of that. So yeah, very, very customizable. Now how this actually works is, well, let's open up File Explorer here and I'll show you. I got some thumbnails for some of my recent videos in the Pictures folder. I can select one of these, I can right click on it and click on Resize Pictures, and it brings up this interface right here. I can choose whatever file size I want, so let's go small, and you can also customize the size right from within this interface here. And you've got some options down here. Some of these, like the resizing original picture, I believe was in the image resizer in XP, so this will not create a copy. So we'll click on Resize, and it will, because I didn't have that option selected, it will create a copy. And you can see that my file name format has taken effect. So %1 is the name of the original file, %2 is the file size, and then %3 was the selected width, which is 854. So I've now created a smaller version of that image. So that is the image resizer. Next up is the keyboard mapper. This one is also pretty self-explanatory. What it allows you to do is remap keys and keyboard shortcuts. So I can click on remap a key here if I want to remap just an individual key, and I can click this plus button to add one. So you can select the key from this list here, or you can just click on type key and then type whatever key you want. So let's say I want to remap the caps lock key to the tab key, which is probably not the best remapping configuration. And that's basically how it works. So now whenever I press the caps lock key, the computer will interpret that as me pressing the tab key. So we'll close out of that, and you can also do the same thing with keyboard shortcuts. So if you want, for example, and it even says right up here, if you want the Control-C shortcut to be interpreted as Control-V, you can do that. So now when I press Control-C, which is normally copy, the computer is going to interpret that as Control-V, which is going to paste whatever it is as opposed to copying it. So pretty useful. Again, very, very self-explanatory. Next up is Power Rename, and this one also, just like the image resizer, adds an option to your context menu when you right click. So to show you how this works, I've got a bunch of text documents with a intentional spelling error. So what I can do is, instead of pressing F2 and correcting every single one of these documents, I can select all of these, I can right click on it, and there's this option for Power Rename right here. I can click that. It opens up this interface. I can then type what I want it to search for, and then I can type what I want it to replace it with. So now it's going to show you this is the original, this is what's going to be renamed to. What you can also do is, if you want to get rid of a word from all these documents, you can just replace it with nothing, and you'll see that the renamed version will just lose the first word. But I'm going to correct the spelling here, and you've also got some options that you can configure right here if you want to exclude certain files or folders, for example, and then you just click on Rename. And there you go. Now you could have also done this, I mean, if you are familiar with the command line, there is a way to mass rename files through the command prompt, but this just makes it way easier because you don't have to actually type out a whole command. You can just do it from a graphical user interface, which is definitely much easier. So that is Power Rename, and you do have some options here. For example, if you want to get rid of the icon that shows in the context menu, you can do that. You can also have it only appear in the extended context menu, which is when you press Shift and then right click as opposed to just right clicking. Next up is PowerToys Run. This one is actually pretty cool. It's probably my favorite PowerToys out of this package here. So this is actually based off of another open source tool called Wox, which I've actually mentioned in passing on this channel before. And to kind of put it in the simplest way possible, this is essentially Spotlight for Windows. Spotlight, if you don't know, is a macOS search tool that's built into the operating system, where when you press a keyboard shortcut, it will come up with a nice search box in the center of the screen where you can search for files. Well, PowerToys Run is essentially that same concept, just with Windows here. So the default shortcut is Alt press space. So if I press Alt and space, and a search interface comes up. And you can also use this to launch programs. So say I want to open up Notepad, I can type out Notepad, it'll come up right there, I can press enter, and I can launch a Notepad very, very quickly. I can do the same thing with, say, CMD. You can also use this as an alternative to pressing Windows key R to open up the run box. I can press Alt spacebar and type in regedit. So yeah, very, very useful. I'm sure if you've used Spotlight before on a Mac, that will be very, very useful for you if you're kind of making the transition from Mac OS to Windows, for example, and you want to kind of have a similar interface to what you're used to. Now you can also change the number of results. So say I want this to be 8. Now when I press Alt and space, if I type, let's say, win, for example, now you can see that 8 listings don't show up, and that's because, well, the resolution on this VM is too small to actually fit 8 listings on the screen. screen. But what you can do is move this interface. Like if I want to move the interface up here, this is fully movable. You can move it around however you want. Now you'll see that I get 8 listings, and what you can do also is scroll through these listings. So it's going to find more than 8 things typically if you search for win, but you can scroll through them. But this option right here basically just dictates how many listings will show up without having to scroll. So if I change this to 2, for example, now there's only going to be, if I redo this search here, now there's only going to be 2 things, but I can again scroll through the entire list. So yeah, very, very useful. And again, you can change the keyboard shortcuts, but the default is Alt and Space. Now, the last one here is called Shortcut Guide, and this is essentially a overlay where when you press and hold the Windows key, it will come up with this overlay of all of the different keyboard shortcuts that you can do with the Windows key. Now, you can change some appearance options down here, once again, just like with the PowerToys settings program itself. You can change the theme of it. So say you want it to be dark, use the dark theme instead of the light theme. You can do that, and now it will show up with the dark theme as opposed to the light theme. This opacity slider right here allows you to change the opacity of the background, which would be your desktop, which is in the background of the overlay. So this is what it's set as right now. I can change it to 100%, which will just literally get rid of the entire background and just make it a solid color, or you can turn it to 0 where it will literally just not even change the opacity of it at all. You can change the press duration, which is essentially how many milliseconds it takes for the overlay to be triggered. So if I want to change this to 100, it will come up much quicker. So you do have that customization option as well. Now, all of these PowerToys have a module overview and a give feedback link on every single one of these menus here. So if you wanted to get an overview and kind of read more about every single one of these in depth, how they work, what they do, you can click on that. You can also give feedback to each one as well. So that is it, guys. That is an overview of Microsoft PowerToys for Windows 10. Again, just a pretty awesome set of software. It's pretty cool that these are both free and open source utilities. So if you guys are at all interested, go ahead and click on the link down below in the video description to download these and try them out for yourselves. But for right now, that is going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed this one. If you did, definitely be sure to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to get subscribed down below. Turn on those channel notifications if you haven't already to get notified whenever I upload a new video, which I do every single week on this channel. And as always, guys, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.